Pradeep Mehta ji. Pradeep, we all know, is the head of CUTS, which he established in 1983. My God, that's like 37 years ago. It's a great tribute to the kind of work that he's done. He's been honorary advisor to several ministers, including that of India. And of course, he's authored a very large number of books that we are all aware of. Just like Meghnad, he's also done many, many books. And he's been a regular columnist at some India's leading newspapers and continues to write about various topics and various papers, including the kind of stuff that he does in this organization, CUTS. He's been given many awards. I don't need to get into the details of them, but maybe now request Pradeep Mehta ji to start off this webinar and tell us what is it really that we're going to talk about in this India-UK trade and economic cooperation in the context of developments in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you. Pradeep ji.
Thank you very much, Didar. And I see Jaimini Bhagwati also joined us. Welcome, Jaimini.
Hi,
Thank you, Pradeep. Hello to everyone. A very good afternoon or good morning if you are in the UK.
Absolutely. Good morning. Good afternoon. Yes.
With that, having greeted all who have joined this webinar, and very pleased to have this partnership with Bridge India. This is after we signed an MOU with Bridge India to do a lot of joint work. And one of the first things that we are doing is this particular webinar on India's trade and economic cooperation in the context of developments in the Indo-Pacific region. Somehow it's trying to look at what are the geopolitics of this particular trade relation and not just economic. Now, we are linked by common democratic values and principles. India and the UK are two potential partners who can collaborate with each other for a mutually benefiting and exciting future. India was the second largest source of FDI in the UK in 2019, and India-UK investment relationship supports over 500,000 jobs in each other's economies. Despite of having the history of being the second largest trading partner of India in 1998-99, UK is 16th in the list of India's trading partners. This indicates the need to revamp the bilateral relations between India and UK in multiple domains. Being a major source of investment and employment generation, along with sharing a similar vision of free and open Indo-Pacific based on a rules-based international order, India can be a reliable economic partner for the UK in its post-Brexit strategy in the Indo-Pacific region. With the UK and India benefiting from stable governments, enjoying strong political mandates following elections in 2019, there is an opportunity to significantly advance the bilateral relationship. India has invited the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson as the chief guest for the Republic Day of 2021, which is just a few days from now. This shows the positive direction of the bilateral relationship. It was in 1993, the last time when the UK Prime Minister John Major was the chief guest for the Republic Day. At a time when European countries, including Germany and France, are returning to the Indo-Pacific, cooperation with India in the Indo-Pacific will only help the UK economically, but also position itself as a key player in the dynamic geopolitical and security establishment. I just read that UK is also trying to join the partnership treaty. Moreover, as the UK government is expected to launch its Indo-Pacific vision, India and UK can fruitfully explore and accelerate mutual and multi-country partnerships in areas of financial and supply chain resilience, maritime security, trade and investment, and address climate change and build telecommunications infrastructure. India has also invited the UK to have an initial limited trade deal that can potentially go for a full-stretched bilateral free trade agreement. Furthermore, when India initiates an alternative dialogue on the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative together with Australia and Japan, UK can be an important partner. However, in conclusion, let me point out three key factors which could be discussed in this particular webinar, which hold back UK trade and investment at trade barriers on both the sides. Challenges in India's business environment. I know the UK government is lending technical support to India to improve its business environment, but I don't think it's moving very much. And finally, the UK restrictions on the movement of Indian nationals to UK, which is a little surprising considering the fact that when I land at the Heathrow airport, it appears as if I'm back to India, in the sense that you only see Indians or South Asians all around you. With that, let me welcome you all once again and hand over the proceedings to Dr. Didar Singh, the moderator of this webinar. Dr. Didar Singh.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. You set the tone in actually recognizing the fact that at the next Republic Day, we will have the UK Prime Minister who will be the chief guest. So this is a big breakthrough, I think, in the relationships, and we will, of course, be discussing this today. And before I get into details of it, we have the next speaker or the next panelist who's going to be now talking. I'm going to request Aarti Ladji, who, as we all know, is a very important, both gender-based as well as NGO researcher who has done a lot of work, starting from London School of Economics to various other places she's been at, and several NGOs that she's worked in South Asia and in other places. And she is going to bring to us this angle of the social sectors, which is important for us to also look at when we look at the Indo-UK collaboration. Thank you, Aarti ji. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Didar Singh. Hi, everyone. So my name is Aarti. I'm a development practitioner and a policy research professional. I'm also a member of Bridge India. So Bridge India, of course, we're delighted to be part of this partnership with CUTS. We're a non-profit think tank and we're dedicated to discourse on public policy. And what this means is we highlight and celebrate India's diversity to help India watchers and diaspora understand and connect with India better. And so this facilitates space for open dialogue, for discourse and debate, such as the topic of today's discussion around political and policy spectrum. So from a UK perspective, with this new international approach, this 10-year roadmap, to tilt towards the Indo-Pacific region, is closely aligned to see a free and open Indo-Pacific region that supports the rules-based international system. So last month, Deputy High Commissioner Jan Thompson said there's a lot of potential to collaborate with India and Indo-Pacific region specifically. In UK-India, bilateral trade is already nearly worth £24 billion, increasing almost 10% last year, and our investment relationship now supports over 500,000 jobs, which is a fantastic and significant figure. As the UK assumes an independent trade policy post-Brexit, its new vision and economic agenda will aim to achieve prosperity in both countries. And this echoes talks which were held at the end of October between UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak and India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, when it was agreed to deepen and strengthen the economic relationship to boost jobs and investment in the UK. And investment in the UK and India, as well as collaborate on financial services and infrastructure, and to continue to work together to tackle really big issues such as climate change through sustainable finance. And this has enormous potential to generate even stronger bilateral investment, especially in a post-Brexit world, which seems to be the hot topic of today and in the coming months. They also discussed the importance of continuing to work together to deal with coronavirus, which has obviously impacted South Asian countries very badly, with India almost having one of the highest cases in the world for this. And so during these talks, there was very promising developments that were made, and some agreements include joint investment in research collaborations worth up to £8 million to understand the impact of COVID in South Asian populations in the UK and India, which is a massive investment for this space. There's also been a new partnership to help open up infrastructure opportunities in India to UK, commercial expertise and financing, strengthening cooperation on mobilizing private capital into green investment, which is massive in the impact investment and ESG space, exploring closer financial ties in areas including fintech, which are growing massively in both countries, and also creating a new partnership in Gujarat International Finance Tech City, which is India's flagship new international financial center, which will obviously create a lot of opportunities for UK firms and businesses in the UK. And during these talks, the Chancellor also championed measures for India to help the UK and financial services industry win more business in India, and also welcomed the decision to allow Indian companies to list on the London Stock Exchange, which is huge. And there are only a few companies which have agreed to do so. This is a strategic move as Britain has a new role to play in helping the countries of both the Indo-Pacific area, specifically India, since the country signed a defense agreement with the US at the end of October. And this is to stand up to China, given its unrelenting efforts to expand economic and military influence in the region, and in order to achieve regional order by upholding democracy, free trade supported by open seas and an uncensored internet. Last month, the UK proposed the Indo-Pacific countries to commit to a 21st century charter for democracy similar to the Atlantic Charter, signed by the UK and US in 1941 to challenge China's authoritarian model. Although the UK has seen cuts in resources for its foreign and aid budgets, there's been an increase in its defense spending, which is relevant for defending global cooperation in order to fully globalize Britain. I will now hand over back to you, Dr. Didar Singh, to carry on with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aarti, and thank you for stating both the Bridge India work as well as the UK position, and you've made all our jobs easier by talking about the trade and investment which already exists. But let me just at this point refer a bit to the topics that we are actually discussing today. Besides this cooperation on the trade and economic front between UK and India, we are talking about the Indo-Pacific. So it's important for us to understand what is this creature called the Indo-Pacific. Actually, we define, that is in India, we define it as the entire territory starting from the entire Pacific, that means one side of the US, that is the western seaboard of US, right up till Africa. So we define this entire area, this entire land, well, it's not the land mass, it's really the ocean mass, as the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, all the countries that form part of it. It's important to understand what Aarti ji was just mentioning about the free and open Pacific region, but I'll just clarify a little bit more on what this really means for India. This is actually a reflection of what we talk of the Look East and now the Act East policy of India, and it actually has 4 components. The 4 elements of this policy are securing the Indian Ocean, of course, it's military and this whole business of securing the nation in terms of security. The second part is integrating with Southeast Asia, so integrating with the ASEAN, and this is the second part of it. The third is Quad. You know, there is a relationship between US, Japan, France, Australia, all of them coming together along with Japan and forming a position that they're taking at the global level really to handle the rise of China. That is a very important element of this. And this fourth element, which is China, is what actually makes for this entire India's Act East policy, as well as the Indo-Pacific policy that we are talking about. In terms of the trade and economic relationship that we've talked about, we've already mentioned it. It's a strong relationship. It's a growing relationship, both in trade and in investment. But it's very important that we should now be looking beyond just trade and economic relationships. We should be looking at the important political relationship that India desires to have with the UK. And in this, I will end by just mentioning a couple of important points which I think we as a policy perspective should be looking at, which is the whole issue of multilateralism to start with. Are we really giving up in this deglobalization which is happening around the world? Are we giving up multilateralism? I think UK and India need to state that they stand for multilateralism. Of course, a rules-based trading system is something we are all part of, and we should ensure that besides a free and open Pacific, we also talk in terms of a global trading system which is rule-based. We should talk in terms of democracy, and finally, we should talk in terms of climate change. These, to me, are important issues which the two countries have a stated position on. And of course, we will hear our eminent panelists today who will be discussing this in more detail, and we'll be able to get a better picture of what we are really actually talking about. So may I now turn to Stefania Bengalia, who is an associate researcher and a senior expert at the European Union delegation to India. She's been nominated top 40 under 40 of India-UK leadership. She's also joined, she was in 2009 part of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and after that the European Economic Commission. So she's been a lot of places, and she studied, of course, and done her research in Israel, in the US, in France, and of course in Spain. So may I now turn to Stefania. Would you like to please kindly give us your position on this entire topic today so that we will all learn something from you? Thank you very much, Stefania.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, so far we have known a world where the EU was part, the UK was part of the EU, but and the geopolitical reality was considering this, but this reality will change in 15 days. We now know very little of what that reality will be, but indeed is worth taking stock of what is the situation and trying to understand what is waiting for us. So in my presentation today, I will first talk of the direction on where the EU foreign policy is going, of course, with emphasis on the Indo-Pacific. Then I will move on EU-UK cooperation, and then I will try to give a prediction on how this cooperation will evolve. So first, we discuss on where the EU stands on its foreign policy and in the Indo-Pacific, and specifically on the relations with India. If I compare the EU where it stands today on foreign policy to a little over 5 years ago, while I was working on the Political and Security Committee of the EU, which is pretty much the UN Security Council of the EU, I can observe two different EU. Today, the EU member states are really confident that acting together in foreign policy reach greater goals, which is something which might have been slightly different a few years back. There has been a shifting in the narrative from the misguided perception that bilateral relations between member states and third parties, and in this case, particularly with India, would be preferred to the relations with the EU. And such shifting narrative possibly has been accelerated by the interdependence which has been shown during the pandemic, but it is certainly noteworthy because it changes the whole basis of relations. The EU is increasingly acting also as a foreign policy actor which is true to its name, with increased attention given to the Indo-Pacific. In the last few months, we have seen the Netherlands, which joined Germany and France in adopting an Indo-Pacific strategy outlining their approach to the region. On 1st of December, the EU elevated its partnership with ASEAN into a strategic partnership, and HRVP Borrell actually participated last week at the ASEAN Defense Ministerial. It is now the EU is really shifting and defining its own priorities and actions in the Indo-Pacific. It's in the process of drafting a strategy itself. We don't know, of course, what will be in that strategy, but the nature of its action as a foreign policy actor are fundamentally changing. When it comes to relations with India, there finally is a clear predisposition in delivering to the true potential of the strategic partnership on several areas, with the establishment of the high-level ministerial dialogue on trade, which has been established during last summit in July, and coupled with the expression of interest from both sides in signing a FTA, I actually expect a deal to be signed soon on this regard. Of course, also with the reaction of what happened with RCEP, which moved a little bit the conscience in India. Negotiations still have to take place. We all know that before starting the negotiation and the end results, there's often a gap, but still there is now a different mood from what there used to be even 12 months ago. The cooperation is moving forward in most files, from climate change, connectivity, digital, all the most prominent files that are important globally and bilaterally are substantially moving forward. However, the area where the most political investment has been done is the one on security and defense. And really, you really see things moving forward, again, in coordination with a different approach as a security actor of the EU. Now we can move on the EU-UK foreign policy relations. Of course, such coordination, as we all know, was intended to happen as per the withdrawal agreement, with the UK unilaterally deciding to change the terms and not to apply the coordination in this field. As things stand now, there is no ground for bilateral cooperation. However, there is no coordination on any foreign policy matter, and all coordination will have to be decided on an ad hoc basis. But when it comes to Indo-Pacific, there is, at the moment, frankly speaking, no compelling reason for the EU to have a preferential coordination with the UK, rather than trying to invest in strengthening partnerships with partners such as Japan or Australia or ASEAN, with which there is quite some potential for the future outlook. Obviously, also in the context of the Quad, which has just been mentioned. The EU also recently adopted the guidelines for third-party participation to PESCO, which, as you all know, is the defense capability project of the EU. And so it is clear that the UK participation will be treated as all the other non-EU members. So coordination is absolutely possible, but there is no preferential treatment for the UK in participating in these projects. Quite the opposite, actually, if I may say. There is possibly a degree of frustration, especially when it comes to foreign policy from EU leaders, that may lead to perhaps the wish for the moment to take some, not to move forward in the file. And at the end of the day, as said at the beginning, there is no file to move forward. Of course, the coordination will, if it happens, will remain in the context of NATO, who may also need to wish and may to update its raison d'etre for a more active role in the region of the Indo-Pacific. But this is obviously will be decided in the context of NATO. So now, given the picture of where the EU stands in its foreign policy and the coordination with the UK, I will try to make share a couple of thoughts on what we expect for the future. Unfortunately, at the moment, there are way too many variables to give a fair assessment of what will happen. The EU, on one side, is steaming ahead in unifying its foreign policy and its union, its internal union, as we've seen, of course, for internal matter, the recovery fund, etc. And it's defining what will be the DNA of it acting as a global actor, a truly global and security actor. So it is really moving forward in this, and it is really defining how it will be in the future. However, we may take into the assumption the fact that third countries may decide to prefer the relations with the EU rather than with the UK, if that comes to a choice that needs to have a clear-cut definition. Obviously, at the moment, we are not in this context, and we hope not to get there, but that is also a variable to be taken into consideration. Another variable is obviously what will be the direction of the UK foreign policy. Of course, with the economic impact that it will have Brexit, also coupled with the relations with the UK, the relations with the US, the desire to have a trade agreement with the US, but then the time that it will take to sign this agreement with the US, which is actually no longer the first priority of the new administration, and the economic repercussion that such delay may bear within the UK economy. And that obviously leads to what share of GDP will be left for attaining foreign policy objectives. All of these are variables that obviously simply raise a question mark on where the UK will stand in a few years from now. Obviously, there is also the China variable, sorry, the China variable, which is not clear how that actor will play into all of this context. I obviously very much hope that there will be a future cooperation structure, future cooperation between the EU and UK in the Indo-Pacific. But right now, it is really hard to imagine what that will look like. It all depends on the outlook at the moment on when the discussion will happen, what will be the elements on the table, what will be the strategy of the EU, what will be the strategy of the UK, and what both actors we may want to coordinate on. For now, we don't know when the UK will be ready even to formulate such a concrete proposal for coordination with the UK. And how will the world look like when that moment will happen? You know, we have seen the speed of change in geopolitical terms in 2020, and my expectations are that such a speed of change will simply continue in the next month. So entering the game now in the Indo-Pacific, so like what the EU is doing, when changes are really in the making, is a completely different thing than entering the game at a later stage when some things will be established. In 5 years, I expect the EU and India to have finalized an FTA and to have reinforced the strategic partnership, including in the foreign and security aspects. And there's the next couple of years, they also have a number of significant appointments at multilateral level, such as the G20 presidencies that Italy is holding right now and that India will hold in 2023, and the degree of coordination on priorities. And of course, the India seat at the UN Security Council in 2021-2022. This really gives the opportunity to fine-tune global priorities between the EU and India. That said, above everything else, I think that what will make a difference once this phase of political game will be over and the Brexit will be finalized and will be all behind us, the cooperation between the UK and Indian foreign policy, especially in the Indo-Pacific, will be based on what are the shared objectives. So if the EU and the UK, at the time of the negotiation, will really share objectives, they will certainly find a way to establish an effective coordination and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefania. And I'm really happy that you brought the whole EU angle into this whole debate today and given us a lot of details on how this part of the game actually is going to play out, especially from the EU side and now from the UK side. So thank you very much for raising important issues like the China variable that you talked about. We will, of course, come back and ask you questions on this once the panelist when the panelists have completed. Our next panelist at the moment is now Lord Meghnad Desai, who we all know about, and I don't need to tell you much about him, except to say that he's a famous British economist and former Labour politician. But more important, even Government of India recognized his importance and gave him a Padma Bhushan, which is a very high award in India, in 2008. He's, of course, written several books and several papers, and he continuously writes. He's a columnist like Pradeep, who does specific work for a large number of Indian newspapers and others. And we are extremely happy that he's here today to actually be able to share with us his views and the views really of the British Parliament in how we think this whole Indo-Pacific business in India, UK really can and will happen in the future. Thank you very much, Lord Desai.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and it's been a very stimulating session so far. Two very good presentations by Aarti and Stefania. Now, I want to sort of start by saying that, as Stefania said, you can't really discuss UK without discussing its current situation regarding EU. In the old days, as it were, I remember when the EU-India free trade agreement was being discussed, and I think Pradeep will bear me out. The big obstacle was twofold. One was the tariff on whiskey, and the other was the access for the British legal profession to be able to participate in India legally. And those were the two obstacles on which the EU-India trade agreement was never finalized. Now that UK is outside the EU, I mean, whether with a deal or without a deal doesn't matter. It is going to be outside. EU and India can quickly get onto an FTA on trade terms because the two obstacles will not be there, and I think India should concentrate as much on EU-India FTA as much as relationship with the UK, because eventually EU is a much bigger trading area than UK is. With respect to UK, I think India's position is now bargaining strength is much stronger now, because whatever, I mean, I didn't vote for Remain. I voted Remain. I didn't vote for Brexit, but I always believed that if the people want Brexit, they can have Brexit. But it's going to be very costly. It's going to be really very costly. And while the various Brexiteers thought that countries would line up outside UK to make free agreements with the UK, it's going to be very difficult. UK is already finding out about US free trade agreement, how difficult it is. And I think it will continue to be the case that UK citizens are not all that enamored of these free trade agreements in which all things go. They want environmental protection, they want health protection and all those things, which currently we do obey in respect to EU. And I don't think sovereignty is going to mean at all that EU can, that UK can have a sort of free for all 19th century type free trade agreement. Anyway, that's our problem, not India's problem. So I think India will be able to bargain on a quite strong position with UK, because UK needs India more than India needs UK right now. And I think especially we know what Sunil Bharti Mittal has been involved with in the UK about this satellite or whatever it is, which is going to operate under the UK-India partnership on that. But I also think that given what is happening in COVID, there's going to be a great deal of interest in pharmaceuticals, because India is a very strong position in pharmaceuticals. And as we already heard, India is a big investor in UK, and also quite an important sort of ally politically. So I think India should go and bargain with UK with a sort of free trade agreement, but insist, for example, on its demand about visas. Visas for Indian students who want to go to UK universities and sort of settle down for a while before returning to India. Sort of a green card kind of. Or at least H-1B visa kind of arrangement, whereby you can work 2 years beyond your degree. So that is I think the UK-India dialogue should be pretty straightforward, and as long as India knows that it is in quite a strong position. Let me say one thing about the China business, because the Quad and all that come into China. The problem of trade and problem of security. In trade terms, EU would be a very good friend of India, but EU is not interested in the anti-China squad which is being set up. They have a different relationship with China, and they would like to be cooperative with China, whereas US, UK, and India are much more hostile to India. So I think we ought to separate those two things and not insist, not that we can, not that EU agree with us on security. As far as security is concerned, I think there is both a argument for strength and a caution. I think we definitely ought to have the Quad on our side, and hope that Biden, when he becomes president, is friendly to India, at least on the military side. But everybody will have to be very careful not to get into a serious war. because a serious war between China and India and the Quad is going to just be a third world war. And I think everybody ought to try as hard as they can to not get into that and settle things peacefully. See, there is a very interesting aspect here, the conflict between trade and security when it comes to China. I don't think China and India have any serious problem about trade. I know there have been tariffs put on various TikToks and so on, but China and India have a lot to share in trade terms. But the fact China and the West are antagonistic will help India in becoming the alternative hub for a lot of the supply chain. And India ought to have a very sharp eye on how much it can benefit from being an alternative sort of pole star of logistics change in global trade. Because I don't think the global trade is going to be as free as it has been for the last 25 years. Definitely going to be interrupted because Americans are absolutely paranoid about China, as is the UK in terms of the technology trade and so on. This is the first time I remember in a long life that the Western countries are seriously worried about competition from a non-Western and a non-capitalist or only a state capitalist country. And I think it's going to do the US and UK a lot of harm, in my view. But that's not my concern. So let me just say finally this: the whole notion of Indo-Pacific is a very important notion because, in a sense, it pivots India as the crucial link between the West and the East, looking from India's point of view, because India stretches, the Indian Ocean stretches into Asia, and I think joins of the Pacific. And India has always had very good relationship on the Western side, across the Mediterranean with Europe. So India suddenly, if you look at the map, the Mercator map, as it were, laid flat from west to east, from California to east coast of China. India suddenly looks much more centrally located than it has been the case so far. So I think we ought to definitely look at the notion of Indo-Pacific as a strategic notion and an economically vital notion, and try and really develop Indo-Pacific thinking much more than we have so far, because India has by and large been more Western aligned than Eastern aligned. So I think it ought to really open up both the Pacific and the Indian and the Indian Ocean Atlantic dimensions. I think I'll stop there because I'm sure there are lots of other things to say, but other people have to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lord Desai, and thank you so much for focusing and really explaining to us how you think this whole Indo-Pacific thing plays out, especially in this relationship that the UK can actually have in the future with India, and how important India is being at the sort of fulcrum of this Indo-Pacific area, and the link between the East and West that you've just referred to. Thank you very much for your views. We now turn to Lord Marland. Lord Marland is presently the chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. This is the big business part of the Commonwealth. Thank you very much, Lord Marland, for agreeing to join with us here. Lord Marland is not only a very important and big businessman, he's also been a minister of the Department of Energy and Climate Change in 2010, as well as the Minister for Intellectual Property in the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. So he's been at the top levels of sort of, let us say, a political life, as well as the top levels of business life. So he brings a really good combination, and I will now turn to him to really tell us how he thinks the Indo-Pacific as well as the India-UK kind of relationship can actually mature into. Thank you very much, Lord Marland. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Singh. My head is swelling with all the compliments you've paid me. Thank you very much indeed. I should just add that perhaps to put it in a little more context, I was actually also the Prime Minister's trade envoy. So I was responsible for the UK's international trade initiatives for 18 months of wonderful airline flights all over the world, including, of course, your great country. You've very kindly asked me to talk about the Indo-Pacific region and India's role in that. And of course, this is so critical, as has my noble friend, Lord Desai, has just said, in relation to the China axis, amongst others. I mean, just as a context thing, there are 18 Commonwealth countries in the Pacific region. And to pick up on a point made earlier, you may appear at Heathrow and see a lot of Indians and think you're in India. But if you go to every one of those Commonwealth countries, you'll also think you're in India, because they're heavily populated by Indians, which is marvelous. And that, of course, creates the enterprise that those countries are enjoying. The 18 countries range, of course, from the tier 1 countries, as they like to call themselves, of Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and then we have, of course, the impoverished ones of the Pacific Islands of Kiribati, Nauru, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Fiji, etc., all of which are desperate for the support of the India state and, of course, the British state. It strikes me that the elephant in the room, to want a better phrase, is China, and that has been very well enunciated. We have been asleep on our watch in the West as China has developed its one road, one belt policy, one belt, one road policy, and has moved inexorably into countries, creating ports and road structures so that it can export goods, building relentlessly within these countries. And India and the United Kingdom are guilty as charged as being asleep on its watch. They've allowed on their own doorstep countries to be populated by China. We only need to look at Sri Lanka on India's doorstep, where the Chinese have built the port. They're building the new financial center. They've built roads, which would normally have been the domain of India of late and of the United Kingdom beforehand. Similarly, on your doorstep, you look at Pakistan, which is now heavily populated by Chinese, where the main road is going to the port to create their connectivity. And I think there is a balance here as to whether India, the United States, United Kingdom take a proactive view to stop this relentless pursuit, or it says, okay, carry on as is, and we will come along beside you. If the latter is the course that's taken, that we will cooperate with China, that it will not be an antagonistic approach, then we really have to identify the skills that India and the United Kingdom and other Western countries who form this alliance can, of course, provide. One of those is defense. And I've been part of an initiator of writing to the UN requesting that India joins the Security Council, which it currently isn't. There have been a number of heads of state, and including former heads of state like Tony Blair, who have subscribed to this letter. I think it is fundamental that India joins that alliance and is at the top table, which ridiculously it isn't at the moment. I think the export of skills, India has undeliberately exported skills, in that, as I said earlier, many Indians have moved into these Commonwealth countries, but also the greater Pacific region. But there has to be a more deliberate export of skills through India's brilliant education, including the United Kingdom's too, where we work very closely, as was referenced earlier, through the great medical expertise that both our countries have, and through aid, where China, of course, has been completely without focus and financial support. They've largely gone into countries and left leaving no skills transfer, not leaving an education system, not giving any aid particularly, and largely fixing a deal with those countries, which is a debt equity situation, and many of those countries will not be able to pay the interest on their debt. So China will carry on with a land grab. And then, of course, finally, I mentioned it briefly earlier, education, where the Indian education system and the United Kingdom education system is very strong. So I think if we're not going to take a proactive stance, then an aggressive stance, which I think is probably the right way, then those are the areas with which the Pacific can benefit from this great alliance. If we do take a more aggressive stance, then these have to be powered more vigorously, and India becomes the absolute key to this development. It is an emerging power base. It hasn't, if I may be bold enough to perhaps criticize, it hasn't yet fully emerged and hasn't yet fully realized its own potential, which is, as we know, massive. And I think that there will have to be a very quick movement up the chain to take a more aggressive stance, and it forming a very strong alliance. Yes, possibly with Europe, but I doubt it, but largely with the UK, where our relationships are so strong. And of course, the United States, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and try and surround the corral in a sense. I think the other critical issue historically that has dogged India and it coming into the greater global fold is the great difficulty of creating trade arrangements and the great difficulty for countries to invest in India and be supported by the fundamentals of rule of law, of government support, and transparency. This, however, I should say, is changing rapidly under the government of Mr. Modi, where it is becoming easier. There is more of an outward look, and I therefore don't. I then would say that there is a tremendous amount of hope that these issues, which have, I think, dogged India in the past, and I do stand to be corrected, and I'm sure will be, but this is from a humble businessman's point of view, in creating free trade, in creating a more transparent and a more rule of law protected economy. And with that, modest criticism, for which I duly apologize and hope doesn't offend, I think I had better depart from the speaking dais and pass it on to someone far more complimentary than me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lord Marland. No, you have been extremely, I would say, frank and very, very key issues you've raised in terms of the relationship, in terms of where India needs to look at in the future, where UK will also stand in this whole Indo-Pacific importance, and of course, you've talked about the elephant in the room being China, which is absolutely correct. Thank you very much for your views. We are now turning to Ambassador Jaimini Bhagwati. Jaimini Bhagwati has been, all of you will know him as a former High Commissioner to the UK, but other than that, he's been India's ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, and the EU. So he really knows the story from different angles. And besides this, of course, he's been with the World Bank in Washington and has also been in the Indian Finance Ministry and has offered many technical assistance sort of teams he's led to Turkey, Iran, China, Egypt. So he has a global sort of view on many aspects of economic and trade relationships between the two countries. So maybe now here, Ambassador Bhagwati, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Didar. My screen has gone blank. I don't know whether you can see me or hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes,
We can see you.
Hear you and see you.
For some reason, I can't see you, but I can hear you.
You
But
have
anyway,
the advantage.
As long as you can, as long as you can hear me, it's okay. Well, very good afternoon to those who are in India, and good morning to those who are in the UK or in Europe. Let me begin by saying that I found the title of this session today very curious. It says India-UK Trade and Economic Cooperation in the context of developments in the Indo-Pacific region. The developments in the Indo-Pacific region are political and strategic in terms of the hierarchy of what is important and what is not. And as was mentioned by the previous speaker, China is the, whether you can call it the elephant in the room or the 800-pound gorilla, you can take your choice of animal, or if you prefer, a 1,000-pound dragon. I say that because we have a difficult situation with China on our northern border in Ladakh, with about 40,000 Indian troops at minus 10 degrees centigrade. So having to be stationed there to protect our borders. So for us, it's a very serious situation. Now, as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, my understanding is that it is heavily laced with defense-related issues, defense and strategic related issues. And here the Quad becomes very important. I don't know whether others have noticed, but China was very annoyed in 2018 when India, for the first time at the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, our Prime Minister spoke about the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese took serious objection to that because they, as you know, feel that the South China Sea is Chinese, while we feel that it is international waters, and we'll not get into the other issues that of Senkaku Islands that China has with Japan, or the disputes it has with Philippines and so on. Now, I'm slightly confused as to this is, and by the way, I don't know whether you noticed last week, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, spoke out quite explicitly about how Russia doesn't understand or appreciate this concept of an Indo-Pacific. So the Russians, given their huge dependence on China now, because the China, as you know, imports large volumes of fossil fuels from Russia, and to that extent, and also because there are any number of Chinese on the eastern seaboard of Russia, and they are somewhat nervous about that. So I am a little curious as to how we are going to see this concept of Indo-Pacific in terms of India-UK trade. But I'll try to see how we can marry the two together. As far as the EU is concerned, I listened very carefully to what was said about the EU. And here, of course, when we talk about the EU, as of today, the UK is part of EU. We don't know what is going to be the situation from the 1st of January, whether this proposed FTA, because that's roughly what is being discussed now between the UK and the EU. But within the EU, France and Germany, two of the largest countries, and I think the Netherlands too, they are more amenable to the Indo-Pacific concept as outlined by the members of the Quad. And you'll notice that I'm zeroing into the understanding of this concept, which is more strategic and political. And by the way, Didar, France is not part of the Quad. Quad is 4 countries. It is Japan, Australia, the US, and India. And here we've had some naval exercises recently. And India was reluctant to begin with because it knows about the sensitivities of China. Enough said about China, but the UK has not explicitly said anything about the Indo-Pacific. And I would submit that the UK's volume of trade and investment with China is such that when it looks upon the Indo-Pacific, it's going to be very, very careful as to what it says or does. Because when I look at India-UK trade, as far as India is concerned, India's exports to UK are 2.8% of its total exports, roughly 8.7 billion USD, and India's imports from UK constitute 1.4% of its trade with the rest of the world. So while the social and people-to-people relationship is very strong, very warm, We are all, I mean, the English-speaking people in India, and by the way, that's just 7% of our population who can really speak English fluently and comfortably. They are all, and as it happens, there's a huge overlap between this English-speaking people and those who are in positions of authority, whether in government or in the private sector. And to some extent, the 93% is very annoyed about it. So that group of people, and hopefully that group of people will keep expanding, because English is an international language. It is the language of trade, and even countries like France, which were otherwise not too happy about the way English was flourishing, has come to accept that English is the international language. So these people are very have very warm feelings towards the UK, despite whatever one might say about the colonial times, and are very familiar with the UK. But the problem here is of complementarity. India will invest a certain amount in the UK, and so will the UK, but there are limits to that. The UK has decided since the time of Margaret Thatcher to focus more on services, while India needs to focus more on manufacturing. And so therefore, if you look at the trade volumes between EU countries and India, it's Germany in the lead, followed somewhat by France, and France and UK are roughly the same. So we have to look for complementarity in services. And here, I would like to differ from one of the speakers, because I participated in about 7 rounds of India-EU trade talks, both in Brussels and in Delhi. And the main sticking points as far as the UK was concerned was IT and movement of professionals. And as far as on the Indian side, the sensitivities were auto. We were concerned about German automakers coming in here. And as you know, right now, our auto sector is hugely protected. Duties are 300% and more. So what would I say? I don't know how much time I've taken up, but what would I say in overall terms? In overall terms, the EU and the UK, these are democracies. We are a democracy. We are a flawed democracy. Human beings are flawed. And despite COVID and despite all the evidence to the contrary, I remain an incorrigible optimist. So as far as democracies are concerned, whether in the East or in the West. So Russia is, a bit of a lame duck as far as democracy is concerned, with Putin in power since 2000 and now threatening to be in power till 2036. China is a one-party state. So to begin with, I think I would like to submit to this group that democracies have to figure out a way to do more with each other. And while trade and investment is very important, and we need to trade with all countries, irrespective of their political complexion, but there has to be somewhat greater affinity between democracies defined as broadly and as, should we say, leniently as possible. Because it's very difficult. And I'm sorry to hark back to Ladakh, that what non-democracies can do, because one leader, and I personally feel it's a lot to do with Xi Jinping. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. What has happened between India and China, this is going to have repercussions in relations between India and ASEAN as well, because these ASEAN countries, some of whom are part of the Indo-Pacific, either directly or peripherally, they are between a rock and a hard place. Because on security and on issues related to their with the rest of the world, they would like to side with the West, broadly defined, led by the US, not by Trump, of course, now that we finally have Joe Biden formally accepted even by the Republicans. So, and China, with whom they have very close and intense trade and investment relationships. But think of Singapore. It's a vibrant country and has huge volumes of trade given the size of the country and investment, both to and fro. And they don't quite know what to do. So there are many of these countries in Asia have this kind of, I won't say divided loyalty, they are in a difficult situation when you talk of the Indo-Pacific. I just wanted to bring this to the notice of the group because as you must have noticed, I'm still finding it hard to talk about India-UK trade and investment in this sort of framework of the Indo-Pacific, which is hugely laced with political, strategic, defense-related issues. I'll stop there, and if there are any questions or any comments, I'd be very glad to hear and respond.
Thank you very much, Jaimini. You have raised very, very important issues, and even your mention that the Indo-Pacific is more about security and strategy, whereas we are talking about trade and economic relations. But as you yourself have clarified in your discussions today, you have mentioned that economic and trade relations actually determine, in a sense, security and strategy. So that's the interlinkage. And just for your information, the British High Commissioner in India actually talked about how the Indo-Pacific needs to be specifically supported. So this is an evolving situation, of course, and today's discussion really was to see where we are going with this, because now with the British Prime Minister coming to the Republic Day, we may have him actually talk about the Indo-Pacific, because as Lord Maryland also said, the China being the elephant in the room, or as you say, the big gorilla in the room, the point is that we have to learn to accept this position and take a call on the future of this area. This is emerging, the East is emerging as an extremely important area, and we need to take a call on it. But before I get into this, I think there are some questions that we have found on the chat box, which we can or will take up. But before I move to the chat box, would any of the panelists actually want to ask any other panelist any specific question? The floor is open. Thank you. Yes, Meghnad, go ahead.
No, I don't want to. I'm happy.
You're happy. Okay. I have some questions here which have come in the group, and I will just request that we try and answer them. First of all, to Stefania, you've been talking about the whole EU connection, and of course you mentioned about UK and EU taking a call on the whole Brexit situation very soon. But my question to you is that, do you think that post-Brexit, it will be easier to have a trade relationship with either the EU or with UK? Would you like to answer that, madam?
Yes. I do see a movement, again, of course, we all need to make a distinction between political statement and reality check. However, I can only register a completely different narrative and a completely different tone when the EU highest officials meet with Indian highest officials. When it comes to discussion on FTA, again, compared to even 12 months ago, there is a completely different narrative and a completely different way of approaching the issue. So yes, I do think that, again, perhaps give it the stimulus of RCEP, give it the stimulus of the recognition of the interdependence that this world is actually having right now, give it the need for finding what has been called a strategic autonomy, and therefore a differentiation of the strategic supply chain of the EU business, which have found themselves very much dependable on China and now are looking for an alternative to address their investments. And therefore, obviously, India, apologies, India obviously is the first in line as a potential where this investment can actually be addressed to. So all of these areas, yes, lead me to think it is going to be easier now to have a trade deal between India and the EU. When it comes to the UK, I cannot talk about that because that is out of my hands.
Okay, thank you very much. Lord Desai, I have a question for you. There is a question here which says, how significant is the impact of the colonial hangover on the effectiveness of India-UK diplomacy?
I think basically we should stop worrying about colonial hangover. Colonial hangover is a problem in Indian politics. It's not a problem of British, and people bring all this thing up, oh, the company robbed us and all that. Forget about all that. Right now, India is one of the largest employers of British people. It's colonial hangover is gone. Forget about it. We quarrel in English thanks to the colonial hangover. But I think colonial hangover is passé. India should treat itself as an independent country and not worry about the hangovers of the past. There is no gain in it.
Okay, here's a linked question.
If you don't like colonial hangover, don't talk to UK. Go somewhere else. Why you want to have UK friend and then you want to badge colonial hangover? No, thank you. That blackmail won't work with UK.
Okay, Lord Meghnad Desai, we have a linked question and actually something that I want to ask you. You mentioned in your talk or in your presentation, you talked about certain factors which are presently giving India an upper hand with this relationship. So what are these factors and how is it that India can actually benefit from it in terms of possibly a future relationship with the UK?
Yeah, basically the factor is Brexit. Brexit has been, everybody underestimated the cost of Brexit to UK and thought that post-Brexit trade agreements would be very easy. The UK is finding out that there really is not any easy way of signing FTA with US and so on. At this stage, India is probably one of the largest economies UK can easily have FTA with. And here is where the colonial hang-up happens, helps. Because we have been trading for a long time, we've been talking for a long time, and because Indian economy is getting stronger over the years relative to what it used to be, and UK economy is getting weaker relative to what it used to be. Right now is a good opportunity for India to bargain a good trade agreement with UK. Because 2 or 3 years on, UK will recover. But right now, UK needs India.
Thank you very much for those views. Ambassador Bhagwati, I have a question for you. You mentioned in your discussions, you talked about democracies collaborating more. Can you name some areas where is it that democracies can or should collaborate more?
Well, since the topic encompasses security as well as trade issues, on the security side, democracies have to take into account who's trading with whom and for what purpose in terms of the kind of influence it manages to get. A reference was made to a port in Sri Lanka. A reference was also made to a road from China via what is today called Pakistan-occupied Kashmir to Gwadar port. So if countries which are democracies are sensitive to each other's strategic concerns, to that extent, a certain minimal amount of sacrifice in terms of trade, sacrifice within inverted commas, on trade and investment may be necessary to consolidate that relationship. Otherwise, you have a situation where we can be picked off one by one. So multilateralism, unfortunately, the UN forum, as you know, has become extremely weak. Their reaction and their ability to do anything much with regard to the COVID pandemic, that's the UN. But of course, there's a specialized body called the World Health Organization, which itself is under attack. So we and these bodies now have both democracies and non-democracies. This may sound a little self-congratulatory, but because, democracies come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and colors. But I think all things considered, I think people know which are reasonably well-functioning democracies and which are not. So having said that, so we need to take a sort of rethink on some of these institutions, like who's the Director General? Did they give the signal in time? Because you might say, oh, what does that have to do with trade and investment? It has a lot to do with trade and investment. As you can see what COVID has done to global trade. Global trade is down and will remain down to flat for the next couple of years. Global GDP will remain flat to even down over the next 2-3 years. So unless there is greater international cooperation, and we don't have to necessarily think of NATO kind of relationships across the world, but frankly, I as individually would like NATO to be looking worldwide, not just think of itself as a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, encompass Indo-Pacific. So would all countries, for instance, Turkey is part of NATO, would it be prepared to be global in not necessarily in expenditure, but at least in its thinking? So these are, I'm just kind of throwing out some thoughts here, so which democracies need to rethink, because otherwise, this kind of thing by which all countries are the same when it comes to economic relationships, I don't think it should be like that, because I repeat what I've said a minute ago, we get picked off, and you can, over a drink, I can explain more informally what I mean by being picked off. We get picked off individually. And that's what China has done quite well with many countries. And this includes developed countries with large economies. So we need to have more closed-door consultations as to, and I'm not even talking about Huawei and things of that sort. I'm not talking about intellectual property theft. All that can happen and does happen even between democracies, as we know that the CIA was eavesdropping on Merkel's personal phone and so on and so forth. So all those things will happen. But more broadly, is there scope for greater cooperation, greater, should we say, linkages between democracies, and we figure out how to define those democracies? I think there is. There has been less than what could and should have been.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhagwati. That was really well explained, and I do hope that this sort of international cooperation amongst democracies that you're talking about can and will actually happen. Lord Marland, may I turn to you? You're chair of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Innovation Council. How do you see this playing a role in the India-UK trade and relationship and economic relationship kind of angle? How do you find the Commonwealth playing a role here? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I mean, just a couple of points before I get into that. I was so glad my noble colleague Mehta talked about colonialism rather. I find it slightly maddening when it's mentioned. It's really only mentioned by people in the political world. I never come across it business or from people to people, and we kind of have to get over it. That is a preamble to what I'm about to say. I also thought the ambassador made some extremely good points about India's role. The nub of this is that India has to grow into its anticipated and much required role as a major international power. And with that, and I know Mr. Modi would agree with this, but not necessarily everybody in government in India, the Commonwealth is very key to this. 54 countries, we speak English, which the ambassador was completely right and said, is the language of trade and development. India by nature are a trading nation, very adept, very skilled, very entrepreneurial, and can show genuine leadership. And I have to be honest, it's been difficult getting, apart from, as I said, your great leader, beyond that into the Indian government. The requirement for India to really come up to the plate within the Commonwealth, get them to support our organization has been difficult. CII are members, and we've got a few Indian businesses, but we're not really making the kind of traction that should be made with India, despite nice complementary things. It is 54 countries, Indians in each country, and it's a fantastic opportunity. So I think it's hopefully a matter of time before India recognizes its role and takes it up. Just a couple of points, if I may, on trade and trade agreements. Until India becomes a free market and a free trade country, it's going to be very difficult to do a trade agreement quickly and of any lasting tenure with it, as it will be, as I've oft told the Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister 2 months ago, that a trade deal with America for the United Kingdom was going to be nigh impossible. A trade deal with America is actually not necessary for the United Kingdom as an aside, because we have a very strong trading relationship with them. They own businesses here and we own businesses there. And in fact, the same should not be difficult with India because of the same logic as has been mentioned before. You own a lot of business in the UK. You're the second biggest investor in the UK after the United States. And you own a lot of household names. It should be a very easy thing to achieve. But in my view, unless there is a sea change towards free trade, it will be difficult, as it will be to coming back to the nub of what you asked me to talk about in the first place, becoming part of the Pacific Free Trade Alliance, which would be a natural for India, a natural step. But I think it will be a frustrating discussion for the moment until there's a significant change.
Thank you very much, Lord Marland. In fact, may I from here, just for the information of all our participants today, mention that India and the UK are in the process of negotiating a free trade agreement, and there is already talk of what is referred to as early harvest agreements. Now, what are these early harvest agreements? They are preferential trade agreements where we talk about certain specific areas like medical devices, life sciences, ICTs, food and drink, chemicals, services. So these are some of the priority areas where we can make some agreements between the two countries pending a final FTA between the countries concerned. So on that, do you think, Lord Meghnad Desai, do you think there is any chance in being able to get some early harvest things going between India and UK?
Absolutely. I mentioned pharmaceutical sort of products. We have a lot going in that sector in between India and UK, especially the COVID vaccine thing should encourage a big exchange between India and UK. And I think we have mutual advantage. These are very low-lying fruits. You can call them early harvest. I wanted to make, if you permit me, Didar, I want to make one comment on what the ambassador said about democracy.
Please go ahead.
President-elect Biden has already mentioned that possibility, that he wants to get together a kind of sort of Congress of democracies and build his foreign policy on that idea. So he is very much in line with what President Biden is thinking. And so I think there may yet be a fulfillment of what he is proposing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are coming nearer about the close of what we are going to be sort of finishing our today's webinar on. But before we do, I needed to raise one more general question to all the panelists here, and anybody can answer or come in on this. You know, when we talk of India, UK, and we talk of Indo-Pacific, can really India and UK focus on human rights? Could we raise human rights issues in the context of, let us say, Hong Kong or Tibet or whatever? Is that feasible, or is that some going beyond the call of this relationship?
I'm completely against it.
Okay.
I'm completely against it because one person's human rights are other people's terrorists. And, you know, just forget it. Stick to trade, stick to security, you know, so the win-win topics are those. You know, I can tell you, every time somebody asks a question in House of Commons, about India, I get this flurry calls from India saying, why don't you do something about this? Stop them asking questions about human rights. Forget it. The human rights lobby will take care of human rights. When I'm doing human rights, I'll put on another hat. Right now, I want trade and security because I want concrete results. I do not want dreams.
I completely agree with Lord Desai, because the first thing that will happen is that people will question what has happened and what is continuing to happen in Kashmir. And I personally, as an Indian citizen, have reservations about what is happening in Kashmir. So somebody else who's focusing only on human rights will have many such concerns. So as Lord Desai says, we need to look upon that. Is that something which needs to be worked on at a bilateral or a multilateral level, or more gently sort of persuasion outside public viewing? Because then governments get defensive when there is too much talk in the public domain.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhagwati. We are now coming to a close of our this very interesting webinar that we've had today. And may I now request either Bipul Chatterjee or Pradeep Mehta to kindly say some words in conclusion of this particular discussion, please.
Let's first hear from Mr. Mehta.
No, Bipul, go ahead.
Okay. Of course, it's a very fascinating discussion. I would just pick up one or 2 points. One is that I think the time has come for this coalition of democracies. Of course, Mr. Biden has talked about it. And if I remember correctly, the United Kingdom establishment, they are also talking about this coalition of democracies, not just in the Indo-Pacific region, but all around the world. So that is something which you need to make note of as we go forward in developing this partnership further. Now, as we speak, the press conference of our foreign minister and the British foreign minister has just ended. And I'm happy to say that there is a lot of discussion on Indo-Pacific, or rather, I would say Mr. Raab was quite gung-ho about Indo-Pacific, particularly in the context of maritime security and climate change. So these are the areas where we are going to work together going forward. I have not yet heard anything about trade, but I think it's going to happen tomorrow when he is going to discuss with the Indian business on the possibilities of enhancing trade relationship between the two countries. He also acknowledged and underlined India's leadership role on 2 specific multilateral initiatives that India has recently undertaken: International Solar Alliance and coalition of disaster resilient infrastructure. So these are the major areas where I think India and UK they're going to work together in future. But as a stepping stone or as a building, I think as Lord Desai has rightly pointed out, this is the time for India and UK to go for a limited trade agreement to begin with, and then expand it as we move forward. I would end by saying a couple of things. One is that, and this is my personal opinion, we should stop hyphenating everything with China. I mean, since early 90s, since 1991, we have to make a note of, and this is Lord Desai has also talked about, that Indian economy has grown. I mean, we are in a much better position than what it was 3 decades ago. Over the last 3 decades, the size of our economy has trebled. 3 times increase in our size of the economy. On an average, we have doubled our economy in just about a decade. So what we need to do with China is something else. Let me phrase a new term which is becoming sort of popular in our foreign policy lexicon, which is containment with engagement. Wherever we require to contain China, we are going to do that. Wherever we require to engage with China, we are going to do that as per our own national interest. And taking from there, I think we should stop reacting to everything what the Russian foreign minister has just said. I mean, rather than reacting, I mean, we are actually, in some cases, I think that we are also shivering. So our relationship with Russia is very, very strong. So one or two remarks here and there in different contexts is not going to have much impact on our relationship with Russia. We should stop conflating everything with everything, and also looking at the holistic picture as well as, or big picture, as well as looking at things in their own merit, on their own merits. So with that, let me now hand it over to Dr. Singh and Mr. Mehta.
Yeah, Pradeep, would you like to add anything, or should we ask Bridge India? Would somebody from Bridge India like to say something? Would Pratik or Aarti some final comments?
Pratik, would you like to say something on this?
Aarti, it's your call.
I think we're good. I think everyone summarized it and brought their thoughts together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's been quite interesting. Pradeep ji, would you like to end with something?
Well, just an apology to Stefania that I forgot to welcome her. It was a delight hearing you. I just wanted to share one snippet of an interview we did with a former ambassador to India, US ambassador to India, Frank Wisner, who even did not agree with the term contain China, but he said to moderate China. How do we moderate China? That is something that's going to be a big challenge for. And insofar as Xi Jinping is there, who is, reminds me of what Jaimini said, 800-pound gorilla in the room. And therefore, one cannot escape that, but I agree with Vipul's comment that we should not continue to hyphenate China with what is happening in Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific has been designed as a strategy to moderate China undoubtedly, and it is having a slow impact, not that it is going to have the kind of impact which is what will help us to move forward in the context of international relations. And that is something which we yet have to see, and particularly the whole world waits for a new administration in the US, and how things will evolve after that would be very important. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you to everybody, and I think we'll call it a day now. We've heard some excellent comments and some excellent presentations. Thank you all for taking part in this, and to all the participants who joined us today. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll